I visited Blizzard HQ late last week to sit down with Ian Hazzikostas, game director of World of Warcraft, to follow up on his latest blog post about the add-on disarmament and the upcoming Midnight expansion. I asked him to elaborate on a few of his points and to speak to some of the community's feedback directly.
I guess starting at the top, why is now the right time to address the add-on situation as opposed to introducing it later on or earlier at the start of the trilogy?
It's a mix of things. I mean, so to be a little bit flippant about it, it's like, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, second best time is today. We probably should have done more along these lines like 8 years ago when we started seeing add-ons pop up for the first time that weren't just making it easier to parse what was going on in a raid encounter, but were like very directly trying to solve problems and tell players just run to star, run to diamonds. This is how the mechanic is going to work. Because we should have been able to see where it was going to lead. And ultimately, it's been something that we have had to grapple with in designing the game, where because of the range of what add-ons are capable of. At the one end of the spectrum, you have players who are using none of them and just playing with the base UI. On the other end, the very extreme end, you have like world-first guilds that have professional coders writing add-ons for them in real time to do better than anyone else can. And a whole gamut of information in between, including a lot of those, world-first guild add-ons that are trickling out and going through the rest of the ecosystem. And yet we need to create an experience in the vein of meeting our players where they are that is going to be adequately challenging, adequately stimulating, adequately understandable for all of those players along all points of that spectrum. And that's a very big challenge. It's, in some cases, I think, impossible when we're looking at certain types of difficulty, certain types of content. If we design something that just ignores the existence of add-ons, people who use those add-ons will trivialize a lot of what we've designed and say either, well, this is boring, this was dull, there wasn't anything for me to pay attention to or do, or just this was too easy. Or then on the flip side, if we are, recognizing, well, a lot of guilds are using these sorts of add-ons, let's make sure we're going to tune mechanics to give them very little time to respond to. We're going to throw 2 or 3 things at them at once because that's what it takes when you have an add-on, offloading some of your cognitive load to really challenge a player. Well, then people who aren't feel overwhelmed. And our goal here is to level the playing field and to set ourselves up for being able to build content that will better serve all of our players. And, so the best time to do this as a result of that is now, because I think the game will be better on the other side. Now, of course, we need to do everything that we can to manage that transition and to make sure that it's fair and not frustrating for players. And so we've been hard at work over the course of the last year plus, both to tailor changes to what add-ons are capable of, to build up new capacities, new capabilities in our base UI, but also to rethink how we design raids and dungeons, how some of our class mechanics are designed, so that we can start moving towards a place where, again, it is a uniform experience for everyone. And I understand this is, it's a controversial change, it's a big change. Players, if you're someone who has relied on add-ons and kind of viewed the world through this lens for many, many, many years now, the idea of that perspective changing can be an unsettling one. But at the same time, we are trying to do everything possible to preserve the aesthetic customization, the choices of like where you want information displayed on your screen, the convenience and organizational tools people use to track their collections or questing or professions or whatever. We want to disrupt basically none of those. We're really just focused on limiting the functionality and only the functionality that's required to stop add-ons from giving you moment-to-moment, real-time combat assistance and solving problems for you there. We do recognize there's, some collateral damage that results from even the narrowest version of what it'll take to stop those things, and we're in the process of working with our add-on developers, in this very helpful community to try to support them as best we can, to give them new tools, to give them ways of solving problems they're running into as they try to recreate entirely benign add-ons under this new framework.
Some users feel like this add-on disarmament is rushed. Can you talk about how long this effort has kind of been in process behind the scenes?
It's something that we've been thinking about and really saying we feel like we need to do this. I would say probably for 2 to 3 years. We've been planning, beginning to design out what our version of things would look like, beginning to figure out, how we would make this transformation for most of that time. And I think, in late last year, I think we started talking publicly about our philosophy here and where things might be headed, with the, kind of one of the final checks in our plan being wanting to take the community's temperature on this, wanting to make sure that, even as much as we could see as developers that we feel like this is limiting our ability to serve our players. If what we'd heard from players was like, do not touch my add-ons, this is perfect, we don't want any of this to change, if that's what we'd heard across the board, we would not have proceeded with any of this. But what we heard from a lot of players was, yeah, I shouldn't have to download these third-party tools in order to feel like I'm playing the game correctly. I hate joining a guild or a pickup group and having to download and configure this thing because everyone expects me to, and so on and so forth. Now, a lot of the concerns rested in is Blizzard going to be able to pull this off?
Yeah.
And that is 100% fair, and we own that. We want to continue to own that. But if where players land is, this is a good change for the game, but proof is in the pudding when it comes to whether they can deliver, I think we'll take that at the end of the day. We want to do things that are right for the game. And yeah, we need to show and prove to our players over the course of actually doing it that we are able to pull it off in a nuanced way with their best interest in mind. But I think what we've heard is that, for a lot of players, they feel like the game should be playable out of the box without needing to turn to external assistance. And we agree.
Now, apologies for redundancy. I'm going to read a comment from Reddit. You've already talked about some of this, but I just want to kind of ask a couple things from players directly. Drunken Bob Dole on Reddit says, quote, everything that they've been saying is pretty sound reasoning. The big problem is, are they going to be able to pull it off? For pretty much all of War Within, every X.5 and X.7 patch seemed to break the entire game in half and needs months of hotfixes to even get it playable. Remember when the auction houses stopped working and people had to go back to in-person trades for 2 weeks? They take on a huge project seemingly pretty late into development of midnight, and it will be the players who suffer if they miss their goals. Hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, I guess.
I think that we have the majority of our built-in UI improvements stood up and player-facing right now. I think damage meters are going to come online in our next beta build next week. And then from this point on, we're just iterating and continuing to add and augment them based on feedback and what players would like to see more of. World of Warcraft, it's no secret, is a very complex game. We have 20 plus years, 25 years really, of engineering frameworks. And yeah, at scale, when you have millions of players hitting a system, sometimes it will fall over, or sometimes a change can have unintended consequences in other areas. We do everything that we can, and our engineering team does everything they can to minimize those disruptions. We try to test everything as thoroughly as possible with our internal QA team. But when it comes to the user interface, I think that's actually pretty self-contained. There aren't a lot of other dependencies there. It's just logic that's running on your client. And we are confident that with all the attention that we've had focused on this, this has been the #1 priority for every one of our user interface engineers and UX designers over the last year plus. It's going to continue to be up to launch and beyond, that we're going to be able to deliver. And where we are falling short, we're going to react and prioritize quick action and quick response based on what we're hearing from our community that they need most. This is going to be an ongoing effort. This isn't going to be a one and done thing where it's like, all right, midnight's out. Hope you guys enjoy it. We know that we need to hit a minimum threshold in terms of the game feeling great to play, feeling fully featured, feeling like all of our dungeons and class mechanics and the rest fit in this new world. But once we've delivered that baseline threshold level, we're going to keep layering more and more on top of that. And the game is only going to get better. It's only going to get richer from here.
Kitlias Steele on Reddit asks, or states, quote, as one who is dependent on some add-ons for accessibility reasons, namely Healbot and DBM, They help with my neurological issues. I'm concerned to see what it may mean for me. As long as the bridge is gapped difficulty-wise with the solutions provided by Blizzard directly, I think things will be okay. Healbot reduces the clicks. No need to select target to heal, and I cast based on my mouse button with the mouse over being my target. And DBM helps give me an advanced warning so I can communicate with my limbs in advance. If I can see the upcoming warnings and such like usual, and if Healbot is unaffected, I personally would be okay, and I think others who would have similar afflictions would be okay.
Yeah, from the outset here, accessibility was one of our primary areas of focus. Even if it's a minority of players who are using these tools for those reasons, we knew that we couldn't go ahead with changes if it was going to essentially force a big number of those players out of the game. And so we've made a lot of changes to our add-on logic to continue to support as many accessibility-facing tools as possible, as well as pulled a lot of that functionality into our base user interface, as well as adding all new things like the one-button rotation, one-button assist that we added in, I think, our 11.17 update. That's been a huge boon for players with a range of disabilities, allowing them to really complete most content in the game without needing to, without needing manual dexterity beyond the ability to just hit a single ability. A specific example cited by that poster, Healbot is an add-on that, I think it sounds like what they're using it for is an easier interface to be able to just click on a frame and have that trigger a heal directly. We actually added the ability to bind mouse clicks directly to casts on raid frames as part of the base UI a few years ago. Similarly, other add-ons like Clique, CLIQUE, still work and are functional in Midnight that offer even more fully fledged customizations there. If you have like an MMO mouse and you want to bind, a dozen different buttons, those add-ons work. Deadly Boss Mods, the function of that add-on DBM, when it comes to showing timelines of upcoming events, we've built in a boss timeline, a boss alert system into our base UI that's hand curated by our encounter designers so that you can see, all right, in the next 25 seconds, this ability is going to fire 15 seconds from now, this one's going to fire 5 seconds from now. And we have been working with add-on authors like the author of DBM to make sure that they have hooks to further visually modify that display. So if you're accustomed to seeing bars or you want to have a custom sound that plays when a specific ability reaches the end of the timeline, you'll still be able to hook those things up. We've also added a range of text-to-speech functionality and text-to-speech alerts focused largely on visually impaired players so that you can have everything using our base UI from like the health of an enemy when you got aggro, when something changed about combat state, called out with audio alerts. And that's and much more. I think at the end of the day, we want Azeroth to be welcoming to everyone. And so we're always going to look at the barriers that are getting in the way of people's ability to access and to experience our content and look at what we can do to tear them down.
You said, quote, WoW's history is littered with examples of the dev team trying to solve perceived problems that most players weren't particularly concerned about. And we wanted to reassure ourselves that we weren't headed down that same path here. What other examples come to mind what were you referencing?
Let's see. Back in Worlds of Draenor days when we decided that, boy, maybe we shouldn't have added flying to the world because it really shrinks the world and, it removes some of the immersion and, the things that you get from traveling around. And we initially heavily restricted access to flight. That was not a popular decision with players, as it turned out. I think it's one that we ended up, walking back gradually until we eventually just kind of made, skywriting and even more dynamic flight a baseline part of the experience that everyone has today. Or alternately, back in Shadowlands, when I think, I can say, I will happily own this one. I think I personally, as a game director, felt that the ease of, like the amount of flexibility in changing who your character is and what you're capable of at the drop of a hat was diminishing some amount of investment and a sense of like RPG identity. Like, I'm good at these things, but I'm bad at these other things. And you have different strengths and weaknesses, and we can work together to complement each other. There's something compelling about that. And I think that had been something that was more present in WoW in the past, with like escalating respec costs to change your talents, back in the vanilla days. And so a lot of the, some of the Shadowlands systems design decisions around covenants, let's say, were aimed at trying to bring back some sense of meaningful choice, some sense of committing to this path and being good at these things at the expense of other possibilities. That was out of step with what players wanted. At the end of the day, modern players are looking for flexibility. They're looking to be able to jump from, tanking a dungeon to DPSing in a raid to PvPing. They're looking to switch between alts pretty seamlessly. They're not looking for choices that are going to close off doors for them in engaging in the content they want to engage in. And it took us a minute to fully get that message from the community. But I think, once we did, we changed and aren't looking back in that regard.
Yeah, this is a bit of a tangent, but that last point is interesting because you see, and it just highlights how different game communities are. Like you see the Outer Worlds 2 recently that came out, and they have a built-in flaw system where you're picking this over that, and it's just interesting to see how some players really gravitate to that, and other player bases are like, no, I want to be able to kind of have a holistic experience. I want to see it all.
And I think some of that's a single player game versus a community oriented multiplayer game where it can feel like maybe you personally like the idea of having a flaw, but then when there's a group that's like, well, yeah, you have a flaw in the content we're looking to do, we're not going to invite you. We're going to invite someone who doesn't have that. Now suddenly you feel a bit differently about the choice that you made. And I think that's a lot of what we saw play out with Covenants, for example, as the community decided that like, well, if you're this class, if you want to heal a dungeon, you should be this Covenant or whatever, and started excluding people who didn't have that choice made. That became a barrier to players just having the baseline experience they were looking for, and it was something we needed to change.
Another thing you said in your blog write-up was, quote, "We are looking for feedback not just on our UI or evolving add-on capabilities, but on aspects of in-game combat that might feel unclear or unfair without some of the tools you are accustomed to using." What are some of the specific encounters you're particularly interested in seeing feedback on?
I mean, honestly, it's all of it. Honestly, it's all of our new season, all of our all of our dungeons in Midnight, all of our raid encounters, as well as delves and more. I think there are places over the years where I think we have had mechanics that weren't sufficiently clear in terms of how they were being telegraphed. And in an add-onless world, we would have gotten loud and clear feedback of like, hey, I keep dying to this thing, and it's really not obvious when I'm being targeted by it. This is very frustrating. In practice, the players who were most affected tended to use add-ons to fill those gaps, to play an air horn, to flash something on their screen, to give them a verbal countdown, to make it very clear that a thing was happening. We feel like we have been focusing on shoring up those gaps on our end over the last year and a half. We've approached our encounter design quite differently, with readability and clarity really front and center. But there are probably going to be some places where we missed something. It may be that, hey, there's a pack of enemies in a dungeon where players are just like, wow, it feels like there's one or two too many things going on here. I don't know how I'm humanly supposed to keep track of all these spell casts and like interrupt them or avoid these things. And we want to hear that feedback, right? And we're not just going to be tweaking our user interface or our add-on API for our authors over the next few months. We're going to be changing some of these mechanics. We're going to be changing some gameplay elements to make sure that the tools that you have are sufficient to understand what's going on, to react to it, and to succeed.
As roadmaps come out in the future for Midnight and beyond, obviously those are really big tent pole, typically like this content update. As the UI and add-on situation unfolds, can players expect to see those included in roadmaps, or is that more so granular, like 0.5 patches, 0.7 patches kind of thing?
I think that there will be add-on updates included in, UI updates included in nearly every patch that we have coming up. I don't know that they'll be at the level of things that get called out on a roadmap far in advance. I think if there's like a major feature, like we're overhauling a whole piece of our UI, that might get called out. But a lot of this is going to be reactive. A lot of this is going to be, players telling us now again that they're on more of a level playing field, viewing things through the same lens. Hey, this is working for me for the most part, but I really feel like I need this, or I really feel like I need that. That's going to inform our prioritization as we look to 2026.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ian. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Pleasure chatting.